Hello, dear listener. This is the State of White Supremacy, August 11, 2019. This week, I don't expect this post to be very long, definitely not as long as the last couple. I haven't had as much time to gather notes and to write out really detailed thoughts, so this is kind of an overview of a few things that have been on my mind over the past week. I might leave some things out, but forgive me, I just haven't had the time this week to really lay out all my thoughts in a really detailed way. The first thing that that hit me at the start of the week was an article that I read about Ivanka Trump in response to the shootings in El Paso and Dayton, and her directing the conversation towards Chicago and saying 7 people had been shot or killed in Chicago and 20 or so people had been wounded, and talking about, this is a problem that we really need to address, rather than just focusing on those mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton. And I found this a very slick, sort of approach, and in keeping with pretty much everyone else around Donald Trump to get the focus. Their job is to redirect everything away from him. And if I didn't see the connections before, so I say it's important when you're in studying racism, you see lots of connections. And a few posts back, I talked about white supremacist Colin Flaherty saying that mass shootings were a black problem, and going, random, vague, story by story, headline by headline, saying, oh, this person, these people got shot here and that got shot here. Is there some implication that these vague headlines are some sort of making it a fact that black people are the ones who are really, the ones where mass shootings are a problem? Really, it's a black thing. And Ivanka Trump directing the conversation to Chicago, was her basically saying the exact same thing that Colin Flaherty said. Now, she didn't repeat the words verbatim, but when you understand the one of the main powers that white people have is the power of association. And once you control that, you can really, it makes it very easy to control thought. White people, for centuries, they've been able to associate white with everything good and black with everything bad, and get us to be, to embrace that sort of thinking. The self-hatred requires that sort of thinking. But, in subsequent decades, they've been able to, associate the word terrorism solely with Muslims. And even to the point now where you see the word immigrant in print, and it pretty much just means Mexicans. And everybody knows that when you say, and that holds true with places as well. So when you say something, when you name a place like Baltimore or Detroit, or in this case Chicago, everyone immediately thinks black people. So her, by saying that these mass shootings are not really a big deal, and we need to really focus our problems, focus our attention on the violence in the inner cities, and where in Chicago, she's basically saying, as I said, she's saying the exact same thing that Colin Flaherty did. The real problem is these niggers killing each other. That's the main problem. And it really, and for those people who try to pretend, there might be some people out there that try to pretend like Ivanka Trump might be something different than her father or whatever, is that it reinforces that she is not ignorant about racism, just like her father is not ignorant about racism. That is a very slick, as I say, Trump reads all the white nationalist, white supremacist publications and knows exactly what to say. Before he was even president, he was tweeting this stuff out, printing out, posting, racialized statistics that white nationalists and stuff do all the time, basically saying that black people are responsible for all the crime in the country and all that stuff. He did that kind of stuff. And obviously Ivanka Trump is very well in tune with that exact ideology, and she knew exactly what she was doing. And definitely for all those people, as if you needed another example of how white women are not any less racist than white men. And younger people are not any less racist than older people. She is completely in tune with her father's ideology and what is required and was required of all people around Donald Trump to recite the same rhetoric. It's like he attacked Baltimore, he attacks anywhere where black people are. And she basically did the exact same thing. Never talk about it. And like I said last week, after I heard about the shootings, I knew all the headlines that I've read over the past week. None of the quote unquote, well, the racists, I always say the racists that call themselves conservatives, because that's just words. White people like to come up with 1,000 different terms to describe themselves. They're just racist, but they like to call themselves conservatives, Republicans, liberals, whatever. The ones that like to call themselves conservatives, you go through all of the headlines of the past week, and they have written pretty much nothing about the actual shooter. They do it all this week. All the Trump administration has been doing it, and all of his minions and his media outlets, all they've been doing all the entire week is defending him. They haven't talked about the shooter. They haven't talked about the shooter's ideology. They haven't talked about the shooter's victims. They aren't talking about any of that. I haven't seen any articles written by any quote-unquote conservative publications talking about the shooter. Every single article I've read it starts off with the left is doing this, the left is doing that, the left. And that's it. And I always find that so funny because, well, the racists, the ones that call themselves liberals, when you read stuff that they write, you don't see the word right written over and over and over again. But the ones that call themselves conservatives, everything they write, every other word is left. It's like, you're dealing with psychotics, or people that are trying to shape. You're dealing with propaganda and people that are dishonest when they just repeat the same word over and over and over and over again. They're trying to shape your thinking in a really robotic way. But I said that the racists that call themselves conservatives are the less refined ones. Everything about them is more obvious in their writing. And the entire week, all I've seen, they haven't talked at all about the shooter. And they definitely, more important, haven't talked about the ideology that motivated the shooter. I mean, you heard there have been racist calls saying that white supremacy is a hoax. After guys saying that, I mean, after a white man deliberately targets non-white people, based on rhetoric that the President of the United States and many other white politicians in this country have spouted. After that happens, then you have a white man talking about white supremacy as a hoax. I mean, this blatant disregard of facts, of reality, it says so much about what the people in positions of power in this society feel about the masses, the most vulnerable people in society, how they are not here to protect us. And of course they did their traditional blaming the Democrats, thing, like I said, with the articles, left this, the left that, try to get the focus away from the fact that Trump's ideology, the very ideology that got him in the White House, is the ideology that motivated the shooter. All of this xenophobic, taking the country back from these people and keeping all of these criminals, out of the country, and travel bans, and we need to build a wall and all that talk, the exact sort of ideology of the white race being taken over or being consumed by all these dark people, the exact sort of ideology that got Trump in the White House. And yet he tries to shift this. All of his minions have talked so much this week about how Trump is bringing the country together. That Trump is, that the Democrats are the ones trying to, separate the country and everything. Trump's trying to bring it together. I mean, like I said, the absurdity of so many of the articles that I've read this week, it is no wonder that the population is so crazy. Because you scan through the news in this society, so many of the headlines are just completely absurd, so ridiculous, so ignorant, such a distorted worldview, or just flat out just lying, that it's all designed to keep people crazy. And yet so many of the population just lock into one publication and read it, and no matter what these people write, they believe it and don't read anything else. And of course, Trump's redirection involves him also attacking Hollywood, saying that Hollywood is racist, and blaming video games, and doing this, scrambling to do everything he can to try to get the focus away from himself. It is hysterical, and that's. But I said again, the Trumps, this whole anti-immigrant ideology, of course, is not just Donald Trump. Of course, mass shootings were occurring before he got into the White House. He's just sort of amped it up. But politicians, like I said last week, talking about that racist, senator in Arizona, all over this country, governors, mayors, senators, congressmen, police chiefs, fire chiefs, any person, white people in positions of authority all over this society, spout this same sort of rhetoric and galvanize the population with this bloodthirsty sort of rhetoric about these outside people that we have to keep out to maintain our way of life, and that sort of rhetoric, keeping the population in this constant state of fear and anxiety. As I said, because this whole country is made up of so many separated little enclaves of people cut off from the rest of the world, and these politicians stay in their positions for decades and decades because of that. They keep people isolated and stupid, and they're so easy to manipulate. And of course, I didn't read once this week by Donald Trump even mentioning that what the FBI director said about most domestic terrorism arrests made this year have been white supremacists. Donald Trump, I don't recall reading anything about him even mentioning that the whole week. He made some vague comment, like he did after Charlottesville, like he did after the Parkland, shootings. He pretends to show empathy, pretends to care, but immediately right after that goes into defending his own racism and attacking his enemies. And trying to get the focus away from him, calling everybody in sight, everybody else racist in sight. But as I said, he's such a clown and so unrefined in his buffoonery that you can't even take him seriously. He's just. I said regarding that whole, the way the country is all broken up into these isolated little, areas where people are so easily manipulated. I read a book this week called Blood at the Root by Patrick Phillips about racial cleansing in Georgia in 1912. And that book is about that exact same sort of thing. It's about that, isolated little white town that basically ran all the black people out and have been pretty much just an all-white town for generations. And there's lots of things in that book that are just sort of earmarks that are, till this day, regarding, and it's like, it talks about, because we all know that that during lynchings that whites took souvenirs and all that kind of stuff of body parts and took pictures and all that, and of course that's the sort of historical tradition that white people have that just goes from one generation to the next. I mean, even when they fight in wars overseas and stuff like Vietnam, because I read that Michael Herr book, I posted that on YouTube, that an audio book of that, Dispatches by Michael Herr about the Vietnam War. And in that book he talks about Vietnam soldiers arranging the corpses of Vietnamese people and taking pictures and souvenirs, and even one soldier sending a severed ear through the mail back to his girlfriend in the States and then never hearing from her again. Body parts, taking body parts. I thought that was an exaggeration when I was a kid and I saw movies like Universal Soldier, where Dolph Lundgren's character had like a row of ears, like on a necklace, and I thought that was some ridiculous sort of thing. But but that was not an exaggeration. That's what actually went on in that war. It was that crazy, taking body parts. But that has a direct connection to lynchings in America, though, taking body parts as souvenirs. But that goes all the way back to even Native Americans. White people used to cut off, breasts or genitals and display them, cut off body parts. I mean, even up to the Abu Ghraib prison incident, they were, torturing these prisoners and taking pictures and keeping them as souvenirs. That's a tradition with white people. That's a cultural thing. And in that book, you also have law enforcement torturing a black male to get him to make a false confession, which, of course, to this day is a routine occurrence. with law enforcement torturing people. That's what makes it so funny when people try to pretend like the George W. Bush administration torture began with them, when torture is an American tradition. The people have tortured in every war. They tortured dealing with foreign enemies. They've tortured dealing with domestic enemies, because the U.S. government is always has been and always will be at war with its own population. That's why they don't want hurt. That's why they're so adamantly against health care, but want everybody to be armed. It's because the people who run this society are at constant war with the population. That's why it's being overtaken by places like China, because those people are working together, whereas in America, the people in power are waging war against their own population and retarding the development of the people. And how can you grow as a nation when the people in power are waging war against the population? And of course, in that book, the law enforcement actually assists the white town, and is actually a card-carrying member of the KKK, and actually assists the townspeople in getting at the prisoners, for the lynchings and all that kind of stuff, and not really putting up much resistance. And of course, this week you've seen headlines with stuff like a black man being led around by a cop on horseback with a rope around his neck, or a black man finding a KKK application in a house that he was going to buy that belonged to a cop. It's just in this society, and it doesn't even matter all these headlines you've read in the past several weeks about all these cops being fired because of some racist social media post they'd made, when everybody knows that these people are going to be rehired. That stuff it makes me laugh, because that is an essential ideology to just not a coincidence that white supremacists always happen to be cops, just like it's not a coincidence that white supremacists always happen to be in politics, or they happen to be Supreme Court justices. These people always happen to be white supremacists. White supremacists always are pursuing positions of authority and power in the society. And just because you throw some out doesn't mean they're just going to find more. And it's in that book. There's lots of other examples in that book of things that resemble things that have happened even in recent memory. How at the time when those white people ran all those black people out of town, the apologists for what happened used the excuse that the people who were responsible for running those black people out of town weren't actually citizens of that area, that they were outsiders who came in and were creating problems, and those were the ones that were responsible for running all the black people out of town. It was outsiders. It was always outsiders. Like I said, these isolated little white areas all over the country are always everything is the fault of outsiders. And of course, this logic that the people who were responsible for creating all this trouble were outsiders, it's the exact same logic that I heard when in Charlottesville. That people were saying that these white people, these marchers and all these white supremacists were outsiders, that they were not actually the people of Charlottesville. The same sort of excuses. Like I said, it's important to know history, and you're dealing with the same people, the way they just repeat the same things over and over and over and over again. They try to isolate and try to make you seem like there aren't that many white supremacists out there. It's just some little cult group. That's why they make movies like that Skin movie, presenting white supremacists as just little cults that operate in the woods, that are rather than people in positions of authority, rather than people that are making policies that affect everybody on the national level, on a global level, trying to isolate it, or trying to make it's just white people for some other area. It's always the other guy. It's a routine practice. And the author of this book said that he grew up in the 70s, like 60, he was 60 plus years after the incident, and yet the people were still talking about it. And he grew up being around white people who were, always talking about negatively about black people, and being a kid, and they knew everything that happened before. They were not ignorant about the fact that their ancestors had ran these black people out of town. They were not ignorant about it at all. And that says so much to me about, because we black people in America, we assume that everybody is ignorant about the past because we don't know anything about our past. Again, that's an important reason of why mass incarceration is so important. Why it's so important that we kill each other in droves, because that destroys continuity from one generation to the next. You know, a 10-year-old black child walking around today has no idea about anything that's gone on before him. Totally cut off from the past. You know, and when someone is cut off from their past, then basically you can shape them and mold them and turn them into whatever you want, which is why so many of us are so easily manipulated by white people to be. We're so easily turned into weapons and used against our own people because we don't have any in-depth knowledge of the past or sense of responsibility. White people don't have that cultural disruption that we have. They're not cut off from the past. They deeply connected to their ancestors and know everything that has gone on before. No one has been in a position to strip their history away from them. They are very aware of what has gone on in the past. They know everything that they've done to us. They know. And that's why it's important for us to know that they know. We're not dealing with ignorant people. It made me think of that documentary, The Rape of Reese Taylor, that came out, might have been a year ago, maybe a couple years ago, and they had a guy in that documentary who was apprehensive to talk about what actually happened to Reese Taylor, saying that he had to live in that town and he didn't want to create any trouble. And this is, again, something that happened in the very early 20th century, and yet he's talking about he didn't want to create any problems. Like, these people are not ignorant. These people, this is something that happened over 100 years ago, and yet this guy was still apprehensive to talk about it because these white people are all very aware of what they've done. They are not ignorant about the past, you know? And they're such an isolated people, cut off from where all the dark people are deliberately. Wherever you go in the world, this is how white people live. And they're a very insulated group that they don't want to, ruffle any feathers because they have to deal with each other. They don't have to deal with black people, but they have to deal with each other. And they're very apprehensive to make each other look bad. And that says so much. And that's something that we all have to really, come to terms with, is that these people are not ignorant and never, ever refer to racists as ignorant, ever. One of the greatest myths that are pushed on us is that racists are ignorant. And another book that I'd read, and I posted this audiobook on my YouTube page as well, the book One Nation Under God by Kevin Cruz. Another book that is really emblematic of how white people are not ignorant about their traditions. But this book is more about their tradition of using religion to further whatever agenda they might have, political agenda, economic agenda. And all the rhetoric that you hear read in this book is stuff that you still hear white people in positions of power speaking about today. Because of course today there's a deep connection between American politics and fake religion, really. Because in this society, if you want to get voted into office, the easiest way to get votes is to pretend to be religious. There's a long history of politicians that were not really religious, but pretended to be religious to appeal to voters. And in this book, until this day, you still hear politicians all over the country specifically using the Bible, because they always only like to quote the Bible when they want to deprive people of things. They never use the Bible to justify helping people. The Christians in this society only use the Bible to deprive people of things, to deprive them of health care, to deprive them of food, to deprive them of shelter. This is the only time they quote the Bible, because the white Christians in this society are for the rich and against the poor, which is, of course, the exact opposite of what Christ was. But again, these America contradictions, hypocrisy, all these things are just a bedrock of this society. Everything has to be reversed. And the amount of times in this book in which these politicians talk about the quote-unquote founding fathers and about how they followed basically the word of God, and what they did was they were just doing the will of God, and they had the values that had been bestowed upon them by God, and all that stuff, all this nonsense, and which implies that the genocide of the Native Americans was the will of God, and the enslavement of African people was the will of God. Now, this wasn't really explicitly said in the book, but that is implied, suggesting that all the actions perpetrated by whites in the history of this country had something to do with God implies that those things had something to do with God. Yeah. And this book, it highlights the sort of connection between white religious denominations and corporate America and capitalism, and white people have, historically Christianity, they've tried to associate it with, because I read a book called White Over Black, in which we talked about all the sort of synonyms that white people have always had in association with the word white in the past. And Christian used to be one of those words where Christian was almost used as a synonym for white. It's like English was at one point like a synonym for white. If you said somebody was a Christian, you basically were saying the same thing, that they were white. And they also used to have a sort of a connection they tried to have between Christianity and capitalism. And this book sort of highlights that, the sort of connection between the two, trying to make them synonymous with each other. And that's it. And all these things really scream out to me. It was said because I'm not religious, but I'm so accustomed to dealing with these religious clowns. People who spout this robotic rhetoric that's all designed to control people, because they're all about control, and it's easier to control people when you got them wrapped up in of course, black people, we know that more than any other group, about how religion is used to control people. But I said it's important to know history, because this book doesn't go back for centuries. It mostly focuses on, from Dwight D. Eisenhower in the 50s, mostly up until, there's a little bit about FDR and Harry Truman, but it's mostly from Dwight D. Eisenhower up until Obama, talking about politicians used religion. And it's important to know history. And when you know history and you read these things that people said and you follow the contemporary news, all of the mythologies fall away. When you see, you're dealing with the same people, say the same thing. It's like years back when the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, another, Bible spouting, racist psychopath, a Supreme Court justice, no less, who implied the inferiority of black people and talked about maybe black people needed like another standard level of education. At the same time that Barack Obama's in the White House, you have a Supreme Court justice implying that black people are inferior, and a Bible spouting Supreme Court justice at that. Again, associating religion with racism, or white people's religions with being racist. There's always a coincidence that the most religious white folk are always white supremacists too. Talking about traditional values and all that stuff, and it's so hysterical because America, a country where pornography is $1 billion industry, including child pornography, and yet this is called a Christian nation. Those sort of contradictions. How can America how can you be puritanical and pornographic at the same time? But again, a crazy person doesn't have a problem with those contradictions. And why isn't these Christian folk waging a war against pornography? They elected a president who slept with porno performers, so and pursued them and tried to pay them for sex and all that kind of stuff. So there shouldn't be any surprise that these people, it's the contradictions that these people have no problem whatsoever. The fact that they are not against big business. That this connection, I said in this book, One Nation Under God, the historical connection between corporate America and Christian America, and why Christians are for big business. Why, and this book talks about why is it that white Christians would be against unions, against workers unionizing? What is sort of implying that God or Jesus was against workers unionizing, that they wanted the big bosses to control everything? It's completely insane. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that God is against people unionizing, workers unionizing. The whole notion that, corporate America and Christian America have been in bed together for a long time. Which is why when a politician says God bless America, it has nothing to do with religion. It's a political statement. It has nothing to do with religion. And how Ronald Reagan sort of popularized that statement of, God bless America at the end of every speech. That politicians had said it before, but it wasn't used nearly as much until after Ronald Reagan started saying that. And how that is a political statement. It has nothing to do with religion. Okay? And I further understand why people have become less and less religious when you're dealing with people so blatantly criminals, anti-life criminals that just try so hard to come across like they are, because they claim to be against abortions. At least they're against white women having abortions. Try to come across like they're so pro-life, and these people are monsters. These are the very people that don't want people to have health care. They want to maintain the hierarchy in the society. They want corporations. They don't want big government to rule everything. They want corporations to rule everything. When they claim to be against big government, they want the corporations to run everything. But I said it's so important for us to know history and to read things that people have said in the past and follow the concurrent news, and you're dealing with the exact same people. These people have historical memory. They're not ignorant about where they've come from and what it requires to maintain power. Because for them, everything that white people do is about maintaining power. Religion had nothing to do with spirit. For them, has nothing to do with spirituality. It's all about controlling people. Because they're not a spiritual people. These people are at war with nature itself, and they're dedicated to maintaining power of all of the Earth's natural life forms. Control is the only ideology they have. All they're cared about is maintaining control of everything, and that's all religion is for them. And regarding the rhetoric of Donald Trump and these sort of attitudes that it's had, the rhetoric of him and other politicians all over the country, and the effect it had on the population. I saw a movie this week, not a very good movie, but it's a movie called Trial by Fire, about this white man being wrongfully accused of killing his children in a house fire and being executed wrongfully, and the movie seemed to be a diatribe against executions and about the amount of times people in the society are probably wrongfully executed and being against the death penalty, really. And the movie itself is nothing really special, because black people are being thrown in jail all the time, all over this country, and held for years when they haven't committed any crime. It's a routine thing. I'm not just torturing people to get false confessions, but sometimes just thrown in jail without even being arrested for anything. Just thrown in jail because you don't have any money or any way to defend yourself. You just throw them, and you'll be in jail for years without even being convicted of anything. Or somebody being wrongfully convicted of something and spending 20, 30 years in jail for something they didn't do, and then they get out, spending all of their most youthful years in jail and getting out middle age. And that's how white people prefer. They especially prefer to have black men in their most useful years, in their youth, being in jail rather than being out there procreating or something. They'd rather have them be in jail that whole time period. That's beneficial to them. But the movie itself didn't really stand out in any way. But at the end credits of the movie, they showed Texas Governor Rick Perry being asked about how he felt about the state executing people and the flaws in the system of possibly wrongfully executing people. And he talks about outsiders coming into the state, and about, if you come into our state and kill any of our citizens or kill any of our police, we're going to kill you, and all that kind of stuff. And the crowd applauded, and that's like, this is the exact sort of rhetoric that is spouted by white politicians all over this country. This bloodthirsty, outsider talk. And of course, he says outsiders. He's as if people in Texas don't kill people in Texas. He says outsiders come into our state, just like Trump always talking about our country and all that kind of stuff. That is the exact same sort of rhetoric, and people applauding at the end of that, him talking about executing people, this bloodlust that these politicians put into the people. And I said, this is the exact same sort of rhetoric that Trump used to get into the White House, the exact same rhetoric that white politicians use all over this country, and the exact ideology that motivated the mass shooter. When people talk about, and this is why these people are so dedicated to individualizing these cases and don't want to acknowledge that the people in power encourage this psychopathic bloodlust, thinking. They encourage it in the population. They encourage people to take the law into their own hands. I mean, like, I'm in that Conversations with a Killer book, with those interviews with Ted Bundy. He talked about executions. And sort of talks about how the state, feeling that it has the right to execute people, sort of gives license to the population, feeling that they have the right to kill. If the state can kill people, why can't I kill people? At least that's how he felt. At least, of course, he's a sociopath, but he didn't see himself as being insane, or like to project the idea that he wasn't insane. But he would criticize the Vietnam War, or talk about the hypocrisy of Christianity, and talked about executions, because he was on death row, and talked about, if the state feels that it has the right to kill people, there should be no surprise that the people, the local citizenry, feels that they have the right to take the law into their own hands too. Creating this violent mentality in the public. This is what these politicians do all over the country. These white politicians encourage violence in the population. They encourage this xenophobic worldview about these outside folk coming in and trying to take everything from us, and we need to take the country back. They encourage the violence in the population. It's not just a product of individual malice. People's personalities, their values are shaped by the society that they grow up in. And like I've said before, only apologists for the society see it any other way. I have no interest in apologizing for the society. I see the obvious. But in this society, people are taught to be crazy and ignore the obvious. Everybody knows that it does not matter how blatant. You can read the killer's manifestos, and it doesn't matter how blatantly it adheres to everything that came out of Donald Trump's mouth during his campaign to get into the White House. It doesn't matter how obvious it is. They will say that it had nothing to do with it. They would just not talk about it. That's why they haven't talked about the killer this week. These people encourage the violence in these people. And I also read an article this week about this is sort of weird, about a museum in Los Angeles, a museum of death that this guy built. That's basically a shrine to killers, and it's basically a shrine to, and there's a place in it that is pretty much a shrine to Charles Manson. And this guy, but he also has, stuff like from John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy or cults like the Heaven's Gate cult, and like props and things, and it's like it is so crazy, and try to make it seem like this is something. It's not something that's put up to show people, to warn people about what could happen. It seems like a monument to killers. It's not about teaching people about, this created this, and getting at the heart of why people do things to ensure that these people don't do these things again. It's a monument, reinforcing, like I said before, that white people love killers. Because the whole Manson killing, this is my thing, because the Manson killing was really shocked people, because unlike all of these shootings that we see today, they were targeting, rich, famous people. And that's usually not the case with these mass shooters and killers. Usually when it comes to killings, people kill people on their same social, economic level. Poor people kill poor people. I mean, occasionally people might kill, somebody beneath their social station. But usually people on the same level killing each other. That's why, poor black people kill other poor black people. They don't go to where the rich black people are and kill them. They kill the people on the same level as them. That's why these mass shooters aren't going on to, they're not going to country clubs or golf resorts and killing rich white people. No. If this happened, then you would see the media flipping out if you saw poor people taking assault rifles and going and killing rich people. You know, visiting one of Trump's golf resorts, one of his golf courses, and shooting people down. Then you would see a strong reaction by the media, really. In Trump's camp, they would actually treat it like it was a problem. That's why the Manson killings got so much attention. That's why Manson was on, the cover of Time magazine. If you killing rich white celebrities, targeting rich white celebrities, you're going to get people not going to pretend like you don't exist. If you just killing people, other poor people, or killing, other people on your level, then nobody would even have known who Charles Manson was if they were just killing nobodies. But the fact that they were targeting celebrities and rich people. Like I saw a documentary a few days ago about Steve McQueen around that time period, movie he was making, and about how he was supposedly on the hit list of the Mansons, and they thought that he was going to be at the house, and how after he heard, he went and registered to get a gun permit and all that, and about how they were targeting celebrities, rich people, making them play, and that just shook people up, because that's not supposed to happen in this society. The way this society is structured, the hierarchy, poor people are supposed to be killing each other. That's why these politicians don't want there to be any restrictions when it comes to access to firearms, because they want the poor people to be wiping each other out in droves to maintain the balance in their minds. Rich people aren't supposed to be affected. You will see a real change when you see the poor people killing the rich people. Then you will see a big change. Or when you see poor black people going and killing rich white people, then you will see something big. They have no problem with black people where they are killing each other. But if some black person actually took that rage and anger that they have and took it to the source of their rage, then you would see, white people flipping out. Like, no, you're not supposed to be doing that. Because this society, the way people are conditioned in this society to... What self-hatred does is that it takes the focus away from the source of a person's pain and directs the pain inward. So you always abuse yourself, or you abuse other people like you, and you don't abuse the people who are responsible for your pain. That's why self-hatred is so important to the maintenance of white supremacy. It causes us to hate ourselves and hate each other, and not make white people want to feel the pain. That's the reason why you have people like Herman Cain or Ben Carson or Candace Owens or Jason Whitlock or Armin White or some self-loathing, Clarence Thomas, people. That's why you have such self-loathing, self-hating black people so much. People that just hate everything about themselves and just wish that they weren't even alive. The very people, they hate themselves so much that if white people built concentration camps for black people and want to exterminate us today, these people would be leading the way. They would gladly take guns and be the ones pushing us into the gas chambers. They hate themselves that much. That's where American whites are way ahead of the Nazis in that regard. Where the Nazis they just wanted to kill people directly through violence, whereas American whites realize that if you can make people hate themselves, they'll wipe themselves out, and you could be made to look like a good person. If the Nazis had done that, history-wise, they wouldn't be seen as the monsters they are if they actually just conditioned Jewish people to just hate themselves so much that they would just kill themselves in mass. Because that's what white people have done with black people. They've done it with black people on the African continent, and they've done it as well with black people in America. Hating ourselves so much and willfully will destroy ourselves. That's why self-hatred is so important, and that's why, white supremacy must be stopped, white power must be stopped, and a African world order must be established. A world order where we basically commit to not destroying ourselves, not doing what white people need us to do to maintain their power. Not let our thinking be shaped by these people. Because white people, the white population, I expect the white population to do whatever these white politicians tell them to do. because it's all ultimately to the benefit of white people to ensure their survival. But us, we're the outsiders. We're the most vulnerable people. You know, like I said, that white terrorists can target non-white people in this country, and what do the white politicians tell us to do? They tell us white supremacy is a hoax, and don't talk about the killer and try to pretend it never happened. Which letting you know these people are not here to protect us. So we're the only people who can protect us. That's all I have to say this week. Like I said, I don't have that many notes and things to talk about this week. Just some things that I had on my mind that I had to get off my chest. I try to have more detailed analyses the next time I post something. I don't know when that's going to be, but just depends on how many thoughts I have this week. All right. Thanks, listener. Goodbye.